I'm not diving right now on how to use these options on cage and edit mode for object modifiers visibility or functionality. What is important to realize is that on edit mode for the mesh, because we're gonna recreate the eyelids mesh, the eyelash mesh, all that, it is very different to work from an activated object modifier than a disabled one, because here are root transformations that we make on the mesh, and if we make those root transformations on top of these enabled options, we'll end up having maybe unwanted results, and this can be extremely confusing sometimes. So usually we want to have those things disabled while we are working rootly on edit mode for the mesh. Then we have the eyebrows mesh object. Start with an armature modifier. There is a shrink wrap modifier for the whole mesh to the body mesh object. In this case I prefer to have subdivision surface modifier before the solidify modifier. There's some gapping, maybe I could fix this with the shrink wrap modifier. I just hope the posing doesn't create some very weird transformation. We should always make tests for these things. We've got wave paint. Well, those are those masking vertex groups, so no big mystery here. This is for object modifier, object modifier, object modifier, object modifier. For deform bones, in the case of the eyebrows, it's pretty standard. Those bendy bones, which are deform bones, contain some very standard wave painting gradients on the eyebrows mesh. Of course, these are control bones, so they don't get anything. On the body mesh object, then we have for the forehead, something like that. These are very low waves here on the sides. They are good to keep the mesh in place more than actually deforming it. Here it's a bit complicated to understand what's happening, but let's pick this control bone. And so here are the top eyelid wave painting. These waves should never get onto the vertices of the eyelash vertex group, and vice versa. The eyelash deform bones should never get influence on the eyelids vertex group. This edge that we see in between is from the subdivision surface modifier. And this wave painting is very easy to achieve when we have actually well organized setup for the, you see, for the vertex groups. Then the bottom eyelid. Interesting enough, the eyelids waves, they don't attempt to go beyond a certain limit. Actually here I might have some extrapolation accidentally. However, these waves from these deformed bones on the eye contour rig have some influence on the eyelids mesh. The top and bottom eyelashes, I have 3 deformed bones for each eyelash. These floating bones, you see there's a gradient here. This one from the left here, more concentration on the middle and more concentration on the right side, and same for this. For the bendy bone set sequences, there are just 2 types of sequences. The cyclic ones, so this one, right, it starts somewhere and ends on itself, starts here. To be sure, we need to check for the bendy bones, and then we can see a start handle and an end handler. So in this case it starts here, 001 and 002. There's this regular sequence, they start here and then here. This is for the top eyelid and this is for the bottom eyelid. All these settings, they are properly symmetrized, the bone constraints are symmetrized. On this model, the rest position starts with the eyes closed, the eyelids closed, and this is much better in my opinion for solving the wave paint on the eyelids mesh. What is intriguing is the sequence itself. Should it be a cyclic sequence or maybe a C-shaped sequence, like inverse C in this case? Maybe I could make this a single sequence. Yes, I have tried another rig with spline skinning that worked like this, but with bendy bones, in this case for some reason, I achieved better results with two separated sequences here. It's better to have a gap here, maybe for the style of this character. These are questions that I cannot still answer, but it's interesting to explore. Same for the eye contour rig, right? Maybe this doesn't require to be a cyclic sequence of bendy bone sets. Just to remember, what I call a bendy bone set is a bendy bone with its two handler control bones. So this is the same controller bone for both this bendy bone and this one, except that for this one, which start from here to here, this would be the end handler. As for this bendy bone, this will be the start handler. So this is a bendy bone set. This is another bendy bone set. Splines. Each bendy bone set it's like a spline in terms of curve, and this is a whole sequence of bendy bone sets. Now, reaching for the last fundamental topics, we have the bone constraints, which it's not a lot of things actually. As we should know, bendy bone sets have each one a single stretch to bone constraint. It is automated anyways. I use Auto Bone Controller Addon. I've heard Cloud Rig feature set from Rigify Addon have an automation for bendy bone sets. The shrink wrap bone constraint that I'm using only for the handler control bones for the top and bottom eyelids. Interesting enough, we can have some adjustments on the offset. This will not make a lot of difference, at least not for the eyelid mesh, because the eyelid mesh is already constrained near surface point. Regarding the eyelashes rig, I'm just presenting here the bones for the top eyelash and top eyelid. I'll only be using this bone as an example, this deformed bone for the top eyelash in the middle region of the eyelash mesh, because all these three bones, they use the same bone constraint system. It's a combo which combines a copy location bone constraint with a transformation bone constraint, which works a bit like a driver. The bone constraints here should be in that order: copy location first and then transformation after, since the copy location bone constraint, differently from the transformation bone constraint, doesn't possess this mix mode or mix factor, which allows, for example, an add mix mode. And this is fundamental to have a transformation, such as the location of the bone, adding up to a previous one. So in this case, this transformation bone constraint is just about locations, and it is adding instead of replacing, while the copy location bone constraint doesn't have anything like that, I guess. And so if we put it afterwards, it just kind of replaces whatever we have done previously regarding locations. So this is not interesting. So this is why we need to use the add mix mode here. Of course, if I change the mix mode to replace, what we've got is the same result as if there were no copy location bone constraint. If I just hide the transformation bone constraint for a moment, what we see here is that the copy location bone constraint, what it is doing, it is just making the owner bone follow strictly the center of that top eyelid handler control bone, and it is exactly at the middle here, because I don't want it to be more left or right. I just want to make, in this case, exactly at the center. And it's all about word space here, because wherever I pose this control bone for the eyelid, the eyelash middle bone will follow exactly at the center. Now for the transformation bone constraint, what I want to have this to do is that as I pose this eyelid bone up and down, I want that besides that copy location, because then it's okay, following strictly, but I want that as I pose this up, the deformed bone of the eyelash goes even more up, and as I pose the eyelid bone more to the bottom, the eyelash deformed bone goes even more downwards. and then it causes this interesting deformation on the eyelash mesh. This can be achieved by developing a scope of transformation, a difference, a range, an extent of values between a minimum and a maximum values from the target bone, which in this case is the eyelid control bone. So this is mapped from, and have this scope of transforms affect some other transforms for the ulnar bone on that map to subpanel, which relates to the ulnar bone, which is the eyelash deformed bone. To be more precise, in this case, about which transforms I'm mapping from the target bone, and about which transforms I'm mapping to the ulnar bone, what I have here for the target bone here is just a range of positions, because I'm just using its location transforms, but only for its z-axis, the z-axis of the target bone. There is a minimum and a maximum value for its local space z-axis. The rest is untouched, so this doesn't do anything. It's just this range, this scope of transformation that I want to use as a map from data. So I need to know the z-axis for the target bone, and actually we can see from here, but it's better with this. It's this little gizmo here. We can see that the z-axis is somewhat like that, and the positive z is pointing upwards, more or less. But this z-axis is not perfectly aligned with the world z-axis, which is here, and we see this better on edit mode, right? But this is not an issue, because as long as I can have different values from the z-axis of this bone in different heights in relation to the eye, I can have a scope of transforms for the z-axis in terms of height here. So I can have this mapped, a minimum z-axis and a maximum z-axis. And these are the data that I need for these two boxes here. I rather prefer having the bones axis aligned between themselves in the rig structure like this for these bendy bone sets, than having them perfectly aligned with world space. Although we could still achieve this kind of thing using like a proxy bone. Just added a new bone, and then this bone, if I just align it to the world space and I make some changes here. Okay, now it's aligned. Then on pose mode, of course, let's just change the size. Let's just make transformations. Doesn't matter its position right here. This is just an example. So I can use a copy location bone constraint for this proxy bone, which has this alignment of axis. I will be using this proxy bone instead of the eyelid bone for the target on local space for that transformation bone constraint on the eyelash bone, the ulnar bone. So for those values which refer to the target bone, if I just go on the sidebar region and on the item tab and at the transform panel, I can see the location. So this is local space. These are local coordinates for the positions of the bone on 3D space. And so the rest position, if I reset everything here, you see it's 0, 0, 0 here. What interests me is the z-axis. So if I pose GZ, everything is changing, of course, because this bone is shrink wrapped, right? Remember, to the eye. But also I'm here on global. Instead I should go local. Then I press GZ. It will travel along the z-axis only, which only transform here, which is what interests me. And no matter where I put the bone, that will be, I can also do this from here.